Have you ever watched someone change an entire room without saying a word? They don't argue, they don't plead, they simply withdraw their energy. And suddenly, everything shifts. The atmosphere tenses, people become uncomfortable, power redistributes itself. This is what Carl Jung understood that most never grasp. Silence is not the absence of power. It is power in its purest form. Today we're exploring Jung's deepest insights on psychological energy, boundaries, and the transformative nature of silence. Because what you're about to learn might completely change how you interact with the world. Look around you. We live in a world of constant noise. Everyone shouting to be heard, everyone reacting, responding, defending themselves. Social media arguments, family conflicts, workplace battles. And in all this noise, your energy drains away, your power dissipates. Jung observed that psychic energy works like physical energy. It cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed or displaced. And every time you react impulsively, you're hemorrhaging this precious resource. Every argument you jump into, every criticism you defend against, every unnecessary explanation you offer, all of it bleeding away your power. Jung wrote, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." But how many of us actually live by this wisdom? How many of us react immediately to every provocation, every slight, every trigger? We've been conditioned since childhood to respond, to explain ourselves, to justify our existence, to be available, always. But Jung's psychology reveals a profound truth. Your constant availability is not a virtue, it's a prison. When you're accessible to everyone, at any time, for any reason, you become predictable. And what's predictable becomes a tool. People learn exactly which buttons to push to get a reaction. They know precisely how to manipulate your energy. Not because they're evil, but because you've made yourself too easy to read, too available. What if you chose differently? What if, instead of the automatic reaction, you chose silence? Instead of defending, you observed. Instead of explaining, you withdrew. The world around you would go into crisis. Because when you stop being available emotionally, psychologically, energetically, you disrupt the pattern. You break the cycle of projection that Jung identified as the root of most human conflict. Because your energy is all you have. And if you don't learn to protect it, someone will use it against you. Carl Jung did not see the human psyche as an automatic machine that simply reacts to stimuli without consequences. For him, our mind operates like an intricate energy system where every thought, emotion, and action consumes a portion of our limited psychic resources. The question becomes, are you choosing where your energy flows, or are you letting external forces decide for you? Think about your typical day. The moment you wake up, you reach for your phone. Notifications flood in. Each one demands a response. Each one pulls at your attention. And with each response, with each moment of engagement, your energy transfers outward. By midday, you feel inexplicably drained, not just physically tired, but psychologically depleted. This is what Jung called energy leakage, the unconscious dissipation of your psychological power through habitual reactions. Every time you defend yourself against criticism that didn't deserve attention, every time you engage in pointless debates just to prove you're right, every time you try to please those who never reciprocate, You're spending inner strength on what does not nourish you. And Jung was crystal clear. That which you resist persists. The more you react, the more you bind yourself to these energy-draining patterns. People who live perpetually exhausted aren't weak, they're misdirected. They're investing their finite psychological resources in dynamics that offer no return. And do you know what happens to someone who lives in a constant state of energy depletion? They become vulnerable, susceptible, easy to manipulate. Emotionally needy people can sense this vulnerability, like sharks detect blood in water. They notice that you don't know how to guard your energy, that you react to everything, that you're always trying to solve the world's problems, and they take advantage of it. Jung described a healthy psyche as one that knows how to keep energy within the system. This means learning to say no without guilt, learning to remain silent without feeling cowardly, learning to observe without immediately acting, because true power doesn't lie in reacting, it lies in choosing when and how to act. And this is only possible when you know yourself well enough to recognize your own impulses before they drive your behavior. How many nights have you lost sleep over an unresolved conversation? How many hours have you wasted replaying arguments in your mind, thinking of what you should have said? How much mental energy have you spent trying to understand why someone treated you poorly? This is energy being drained without return. You're keeping ghosts alive that should have died long ago. You're feeding dynamics that only exist because you insist on responding to them. Psychic energy functions like a force field. When well guarded, it creates presence. You can enter a room and command respect without saying a word, but when poorly managed, you become invisible, reactive, and fragile. And the world shows no mercy to those who give themselves away easily. Therefore, begin observing your own triggers. What makes you react automatically? What makes you lose your center? These are the exact points where your energy escapes. This is where your work begins, not to become cold or indifferent, but to become selective, to become sovereign over yourself. And here comes one of Jung's most profound insights. When you conserve your energy, you break the projections that others place upon you. And that creates disturbance, because now we enter the territory of silent manipulation. You believe you're in control. You think your emotional responses are conscious choices. But the truth is darker, more complex. Most of your reactions are programmed, conditioned responses that have become so automatic you mistake them for free will. And those who understand this can manipulate you with terrifying ease. Manipulative people don't need to raise their voices, make threats, or force situations. They simply need to trigger the buttons you've left exposed and watch you react, predictably, every time. Carl Jung called this mechanism projection, the psychological process by which we attribute to others what we cannot accept in ourselves. But there's another dimension to this phenomenon that few recognize. While others project onto you, you become the receptacle for these images. And the more emotionally available you are, the more you become a blank canvas for these projections. Think about it carefully. That friend who only contacts you when they're in crisis, that partner who always needs you to save the day, that person who praises you, but only as long as you remain useful to them. None of this happens by coincidence. They're not relating to you, the authentic you. They're relating to the idea of you, to the role you've agreed to play in their psychological drama. And why do you agree to play these roles? Because you fear disappointment. You fear not being loved. You fear abandonment. The most effective manipulation doesn't occur through shouting or overt coercion. It happens in the silence of guilt. When you feel indebted to another person, when you believe you must be available, must help, must understand, even when it destroys you from within. And here lies the central insight. The manipulator doesn't need to control you directly. They just need you to keep reacting in the same predictable patterns. But when you stop reacting, the entire game collapses. When you begin saying no without explanation, responding with silence, withdrawing instead of defending yourself, the projections start to crumble. The mask they've placed on you falls away, and this leaves people profoundly unsettled because they no longer know who you are. But worse, now they're forced to look at themselves, and not everyone is prepared for that confrontation. Your unavailability becomes threatening because it forces others to face their own emptiness. The silence you offer reveals the internal noise they've been avoiding, and then comes the attack, the criticism, the emotional drama, the accusations. Not because you're wrong, but because you've stopped serving as their convenient mirror. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you withdraw, when you stop feeding toxic cycles, the other person's shadow begins to emerge. And this is unbearable for those who have always used you as an escape from themselves. But what about you? Are you ready to handle the discomfort of being misunderstood, rejected, or even attacked for protecting your energy? Are you prepared to endure the silence that follows disruption? Because it's precisely in that silence that a new kind of power is born. The modern world worships noise. Everyone competing to be heard, to respond faster, to win pointless debates and prove their point, even at the cost of their peace. But there exists a power that few understand and even fewer master. The power of silence, not the passive silence of fear or the empty silence of avoidance, but conscious, strategic, brutally lucid silence. The kind of silence that isn't absence, but amplified presence. Jung saw silence not as a void to be filled, but as fertile ground for inner transformation. When you stop reacting, you begin truly observing, and through observation, you detect patterns that previously went unnoticed: emotional repetitions, manipulation tactics, cycles of self-sabotage. Silence creates the space for lucidity, and lucidity becomes dangerous for those who live to control you. Have you noticed how certain people panic when you don't immediately respond, when you don't explain yourself, when you simply withdraw? It's not because they genuinely miss your presence. It's because your silence strips away their narrative control. While you speak, you remain in their game. But when you choose silence, you change the fundamental rules. And that destabilizes anyone who depends on your reaction for their sense of power. True silence isn't merely the absence of speech, it's mastery over your own energy. It's the refusal to be pulled into someone else's emotional vortex. It's the conscious choice not to engage in battles that don't serve your growth or purpose. Jung emphasized that individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, requires this separation, because only in silence can you hear yourself without the world's constant interference. But make no mistake, silence carries a price. It will distance you from people who valued you only for the role you played in their lives. It will make you incomprehensible to those who only saw you through their projections. It may cause others to label you as cold, distant, or arrogant. But all of these reactions come from people who never wanted to engage with your depth, only with your utility. And here emerges the difficult truth. As you mature psychologically, you become increasingly selective with your words, because you understand that each sentence represents an energetic investment, and not everyone deserves access to your truth. Sometimes silence isn't retreat, it's sovereignty. It's the language of those who no longer need external validation to know their worth. Silence creates discomfort because it forces others to contend with their own thoughts, their internal noise. And this discomfort reveals more about them than any argument of yours ever could. You don't need to explain your absence. It explains itself. And those threatened by it reveal how much they depended on your imbalance to maintain their sense of control. But the most powerful silence isn't the one that disturbs others. It's the silence that reconstructs you from within. The silence that connects you to something beyond external approval. It's in this internal space, liberated from others' demands, that you begin to recover your vital energy, to reconnect with your essence. Boundaries aren't walls that separate you from others. They're sacred spaces where you reclaim yourself. Jung understood that the individuated personality needs clear psychological boundaries, not to isolate itself, but to engage authentically with the world. Without boundaries, you become what he called psychologically inflated, merged with others, unable to distinguish where you end and they begin. And in this merged state, you can never truly connect. Because real connection requires two complete individuals choosing each other, not two fragments desperately seeking wholeness in the other. Think about your relationships. How many are based on genuine choice? And how many exist because you're afraid to disappoint, afraid to be alone, afraid to be misunderstood? Jung observed that most human suffering stems not from external circumstances, but from the betrayal of our own inner truth. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you laugh when you want to cry. Every time you stay when you need to leave. You fracture yourself a little more. And these fractures accumulate until you no longer recognize yourself. This is why boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for psychological integrity. They're the container that holds your authentic self together in a world constantly trying to pull you apart. But creating boundaries requires courage. The courage to disappoint others. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to stand alone with your truth when the crowd demands your conformity. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, the ability to stand firm in your truth even when external pressure pushes against you. And this capacity doesn't develop overnight. It grows through practice, through small acts of boundary setting that gradually strengthen your psychological core. Not responding immediately to messages, not offering explanations when none are needed, not defending yourself against projections that have nothing to do with who you truly are. Each time you honor your boundaries, you send a powerful message, not just to others, but to yourself. You declare, "My energy is precious, my peace is non-negotiable, my integrity matters." And something remarkable happens when you consistently honor these boundaries. The right people begin to respect them. Those who truly care about you, not just what you provide, will adjust to your new standards. They'll respect your no. They'll honor your silence. They'll recognize your sovereignty. And those who cannot respect your boundaries reveal themselves as people who never respected you to begin with. This natural sorting process, painful as it might be, is actually the universe showing you who deserves a place in your life. Jung believed that synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, often guide us toward our authentic path. And sometimes, the most meaningful synchronicity is seeing who stays when you start honoring your truth. When you stop being everybody's emotional emergency button, something profound happens. People begin to see you differently, or more accurately, they begin to see you at all, rather than their projections onto you. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. the psychological process where reality gradually replaces fantasy in how others perceive you. And this process is often uncomfortable for everyone involved. For them, because they must now relate to you as you actually are, not as the convenient character they created in their minds. For you, because you must stand firmly in your authentic self without the familiar roles that once defined your relationships. This explains why becoming unavailable creates such powerful reactions in others. It's not your absence they mourn, it's the loss of the psychological function you performed for them. You were their dumping ground for negativity, their source of validation, their emotional regulator, their excuse for not facing their own shadows. And when you remove yourself from these roles, you force a kind of psychological crisis. Jung saw crisis not as something to be avoided, but as the necessary catalyst for growth. When you withdraw your energy from dysfunctional dynamics, you create the space for something new to emerge, both in yourself and in others. Some will rise to this challenge and begin relating to you authentically. Others will intensify their attempts to pull you back into familiar patterns, and still others will leave entirely, unable to adapt to this new reality where you are no longer their psychological crutch. All of these responses provide valuable information about the true nature of your relationships. They reveal who was connected to you and who was merely using you as an extension of themselves. Jung emphasized that true individuation requires this sorting process, this willingness to let relationships transform or dissolve as you become more fully yourself. Because authentic connection can only exist between two individuated beings, two people who have done the work of reclaiming themselves from the expectations and projections of others. This is the paradox of boundaries. They might initially seem to create distance, but they actually make genuine intimacy possible. When you know where you end and others begin, when your yes means yes and your no means no, you can give yourself fully without fear of being consumed. You can love without losing yourself. You can care without carrying others' psychological burdens. You can engage without entanglement. This is the freedom that comes from mastering the art of conscious unavailability. When you stop being available to everyone and everything, a profound transformation begins. First comes the discomfort, the guilt, the doubt, the fear that you're being selfish or cold. This reaction is natural. You've been conditioned your entire life to put others first, to prioritize harmony over authenticity, to sacrifice yourself for connection. Your nervous system literally needs time to adjust to this new way of being. Jung recognized that transformation never comes without discomfort. He wrote, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain." And this is precisely what you're experiencing. The birth pains of a new consciousness. A consciousness that values depth over breadth, quality over quantity, truth over comfort. As this initial discomfort subsides, something else emerges. Silence. Not the awkward, uncomfortable silence of social anxiety, but the rich, fertile silence of presence. The silence that allows you to hear your own voice, perhaps for the first time since childhood. In this silence, you begin to distinguish between the authentic voice of yourself and the internalized voices of others. You recognize how many of your shoulds and musts never belong to you at all. They were installed by parents, teachers, society, religion, external authorities that you internalized so completely you mistook their voice for your own. Jung called this process de-identification, the gradual separation of the true self from the adaptive personas we develop to survive. And in this de-identification, you begin to feel a peculiar sensation. Space. Psychological space. Emotional space. Energetic space. The space to choose rather than react. The space to create rather than conform. The space to be rather than do. This internal spaciousness is what Jung meant by individuation, not isolation from others, but integration within yourself, the gathering of all your fragmented parts into a coherent, authentic whole. As this internal integration progresses, you notice changes in how you engage with the world. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You do less, but your actions have greater impact. You need less external validation because you've developed the capacity to validate yourself. This shift represents a fundamental reorientation from seeking wholeness outside yourself to discovering it within. And as you embody this wholeness, something remarkable happens in your relationships. The people who were drawn to your weakness begin to fall away. The relationships based on mutual neediness or unconscious contracts begin to dissolve. And new connections emerge. Connections based not on what you do for each other, but on who you are together. Jung observed that individuated people naturally attract others at similar levels of consciousness, not because they're seeking these connections, but because like resonates with like in the field of human energy. This is the ultimate paradox of conscious unavailability. By becoming unavailable to what depletes you, you become profoundly available to what nourishes you. By saying no to what doesn't align with your truth, you create the space to say yes to what does. By withdrawing from superficial connections, you open yourself to depth. And in that depth, you discover what Jung considered the ultimate aim of human existence: meaning. Not happiness, not success, not approval, but meaning. The sense that your life expresses something essential about who you are. That your presence in the world matters not because of what you achieve or accumulate, but because of the quality of consciousness you bring to each moment. This is the gift of silence. Not isolation from life, but deeper participation in it. Not withdrawal from reality, but fuller engagement with what actually matters. It's not enough to understand all of this intellectually. Knowledge without application is just another form of psychological inflation, the very thing Jung warned against. True transformation requires practice, the consistent application of these principles in your daily life. So how do you begin cultivating conscious unavailability? First, recognize that this isn't about becoming cold, distant, or arrogant. It's about becoming intentional with your energy, selective with your engagement, and sovereign over your responses. Start with small acts of boundary setting, not responding immediately to every message. Taking a breath before reacting to provocation, leaving a conversation before it descends into chaos. Turning off your phone without explanation or apology. Saying "not today" without offering justification. Saying "I'm not interested" without softening the blow. Saying "I won't get involved" without guilt. But here's the most crucial part. You don't need to explain your choices. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't owe anyone an account of your internal process. This might feel foreign, even wrong at first. You've been conditioned to believe that withholding explanation is rude or inconsiderate. But Jung understood that excessive explanation often stems from insecurity, from the need to be understood rather than the desire to communicate clearly. When you explain yourself unnecessarily, you're seeking approval for choices that require no approval. You're inviting negotiation where none is needed. You're undermining your own authority in your life. True psychological maturity includes the capacity to disappoint others, to allow them their reactions without feeling responsible for managing their emotions. This doesn't mean being cruel or dismissive. It means recognizing where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. It means understanding that their discomfort with your boundaries is part of their growth, not evidence that your boundaries are wrong. Jung observed that every process of individuation involves periods of isolation, not depressive isolation or avoidant isolation, but sacred isolation. A time of inner retreat where you relearn to hear your own voice without constant external interference. A time to rebuild your identity not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Want a reliable indicator of your psychological evolution? Notice who distances themselves when you become more selective with your energy. Notice who tries to provoke you when you stop providing predictable reactions. Notice who accuses you of changing when you finally start protecting your peace. These aren't signs that you're doing something wrong. They're confirmation that you're finally doing something right. Being unavailable will feel uncomfortable at first. You'll battle guilt. You'll question your choices. You'll hear accusations of selfishness. But this discomfort is part of the necessary deconstruction process. You've spent your entire life being programmed to put yourself last. Naturally, reclaiming your primacy in your own life will create friction, both internal and external. Conscious unavailability forms the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to what depletes you, you say yes to yourself. When you withdraw from toxic environments, you affirm that your peace matters more than false connection. And when you stop explaining yourself, you begin cultivating something rare in today's world: presence. Not everyone will appreciate this quality of presence. Your emotional sovereignty will expose wounds in others they prefer to ignore. It will reveal how much they depended on your compliance to feel secure. It will unmask the unconscious contracts that governed your relationships. And this revelation often leads to rupture, to pain, loneliness, and the unsettling feeling that you're losing something valuable. But what you're actually losing are the chains that kept you small. What you're losing is the obligation to live for others instead of yourself. What you're losing is the burden of carrying psychological weights that were never yours to bear. And in that loss, you gain everything that matters: authenticity, integrity, freedom, the capacity to choose your engagements rather than being chosen by your impulses, the ability to love from wholeness rather than need, the power to create your life rather than merely reacting to circumstances. This is Jung's ultimate message, that true liberation comes not from controlling the external world, but from mastering your internal one. Not from accumulating connections, but from deepening into your own authentic nature. Not from constant availability, but from conscious choice about where your precious energy flows. When you stop being available to everyone, something profound begins to happen. First comes the silence, an uncomfortable silence that seems to scream inside you. You wonder if you're doing the right thing, if you're being too harsh, if you're losing people who matter. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins to cleanse, to calm, to heal. And then comes solitude. Not the solitude of absence, but the solitude of complete presence with yourself. The solitude of the strong, the solitude of one who no longer betrays themselves to keep others close. And in that space, clarity replaces confusion. Peace replaces anxiety. Strength replaces neediness. the strength of being whole within yourself. Jung said that individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires distancing yourself from collective expectations, disidentifying from social masks, walking alone for a while. And that's exactly what conscious unavailability allows you to do. When you decide to become unavailable to what doesn't serve your growth, you aren't fleeing life. You're returning to yourself. This is the point where you stop being a reactor and become a creator. You cease being shaped by circumstances and begin shaping your reality from within. The people who feel uncomfortable with your absence reveal that they never wanted you. They wanted what you provided. They wanted the role you played, not the person you are. And now that you no longer fit that role, they don't know how to relate to you. This realization, painful as it is, carries profound liberation. You will lose people, but you will find yourself. You will distance yourself from familiar places, but you will reconnect with your essence. You will be misunderstood, but you will finally be respected. Because when you're no longer available for anything and everything, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. This is rebirth, the beginning of a life where you no longer accept emotional crumbs, mind games, or voids disguised as connection. Now, you only engage with what resonates with your peace, your truth, your wholeness. And if you've stayed with this message to the end, part of you already recognizes this truth. Part of you already understands that being approved of means nothing if it requires self-betrayal. That true self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it means walking alone for a time. Jung understood that the most meaningful journeys often begin in solitude, that finding your authentic voice requires first silencing the noise, that becoming who you truly are demands the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to disappoint, the courage to reimagine connection not as constant accessibility, but as authentic presence when you choose to engage. This is the revolutionary power of silence, not as absence, but as the fullest expression of who you really are. So I ask you, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even judged in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of becoming whole? If this message resonated with you, write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many are ready for this transformation. If this video spoke to you, subscribe to our channel for more insights on psychological liberation, and don't miss our next exploration of Jungian wisdom. Check it out.